Ben and Clara, meanwhile, barely supervised their kids, who were becoming increasingly restless and destructive with each passing day. They were like tiny, adorable demolition crews, determined to dismantle my house one crayon-scribbled wall and discarded toy at a time. My work suffered terribly. I tried explaining to my family that I needed quiet time to code, that deadlines were looming, and that my job actually, paid for everything they were currently enjoying. But they treated my profession like it was some frivolous hobby, something I could set aside whenever they demanded attention. One particularly stressful day, my boss Jack called me directly. "Evelyn, is everything okay? You haven't been responding to emails, and the client is getting anxious about the timeline." His voice was laced with concern, but I could hear the underlying frustration. I locked myself in the bathroom to take the call. It was the only quiet place in the entire house, a small porcelain sanctuary from the storm raging outside. "I'm sorry, Jack. I've had some family situations come up." I hated the way I sounded, weak and apologetic. "I understand personal emergencies happen," he said, his tone softening slightly. "But this project is time-sensitive. Can you get back on track by Friday?" "I promise I will," I said, knowing it meant pulling all-nighters after everyone went to bed. The thought filled me with dread, but I had no choice. That evening I worked frantically in my office, fueled by caffeine and desperation. I was determined to salvage the project, to prove to myself, and maybe to my family, that my work mattered. But my efforts were short-lived. 10 minutes later, I heard the unmistakable sound of my office door creaking open. I spun around in my chair, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing in the doorway, bathed in the dim light of the hallway, was my nephew, Liam. "Can we play a game?" he asked, his eyes wide with innocent expectation. He was already reaching for my mouse, his grubby little fingers hovering over the touchpad. "No," I said sharply, jumping up from my chair. "This is my work computer. It has important files on it." "But we're bored," Liam whined, his lower lip trembling. "Where are your parents?" I asked, trying to keep the irritation from my voice. "Mom said to find something quiet to do," Liam replied, still eyeing my computer with longing. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. "This isn't a place for kids to play. Please go find your mom and tell her I said you need supervision." He looked crestfallen, but he reluctantly turned and left, followed by his younger sister, Chloe. I locked the door behind them, my hands shaking slightly. I needed to concentrate. I needed to work. 15 minutes later, there was a loud, insistent knock. "Evelyn, open up! It's me, Clara!" I sighed and unlocked the door, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. My sister stood there, her arms crossed, her face etched with annoyance. Liam and Chloe were huddled behind her, their eyes wide and accusing. "The kids said you yelled at them," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't yell," I said, trying to remain calm. "I told them they can't play with my work computer. That computer has all my work projects on it. If they accidentally delete something or download a virus, I could lose weeks of work." Clara rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic, Evelyn. They just wanted to play a game." "Then set them up with a game in the living room," I suggested, my voice rising again. "Or take them outside. Or, watch them yourself instead of sending them to bother me while I'm working." Her face hardened. "Evelyn, this is why you're alone. You have no idea what it's like to be a parent. We don't get to just lock ourselves away when things get inconvenient. And I don't get to have my home invaded for a month, my work dismissed as unimportant, and my bank account drained by your vacation," I snapped back, my voice laced with venom. Clara's mouth fell open. "Wow," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just wow." She turned and marched away, dragging the kids behind her. I knew I'd pay for that comment later, but in the moment, I was too frustrated to care. I slammed the door shut and locked it again, feeling a surge of defiance. Sure enough, at dinner that night, Clara had apparently shared our conversation with everyone. The table was unusually quiet, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Finally, Diane broke the silence. "Evelyn, Clara told us what you said to her today. I think you owe her an apology. She works very hard as a mother, and for you to suggest she's not doing her job—" "That's not what I said," I interrupted, my voice trembling slightly. I said she shouldn't expect me to watch her kids while I'm working. You don't understand how exhausting it is to be a parent, Clara chimed in, her eyes flashing with anger. You have no responsibilities except to yourself. I looked around the table, my gaze sweeping across the faces of my family. No responsibilities? I'm responsible for this house, for my career, and apparently for feeding and housing all of you for a month without any help or consideration. Oh, here we go again with the poor me routine, Clara said, rolling her eyes. You're just bitter because you're alone. The table fell silent again. I stared at my sister, then at my parents, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend me. No one did. They just looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, avoiding my gaze. You're right, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know what it's like to be a parent. But you don't know what it's like to have your home invaded for a month, to be expected to pay for everything, to clean up after everyone, and to have your work dismissed as unimportant. I stood up from the table, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape. I'm going to work now. There are leftovers in the fridge if anyone's still hungry. I spent the rest of the evening in my office, ignoring the sounds of the TV and the occasional bursts of laughter that drifted down the hallway. Part of me wished I could join them, be the fun aunt and sister they wanted me to be. But another part of me, the part that was slowly suffocating under the weight of their expectations, was just counting down the days until I could have my peace and quiet back. Finally, their extended vacation came to an end. As they packed up their cars, loading them with luggage and presents, I stood on the porch, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over me. Despite everything, they were still my family. Diane hugged me last, her embrace tight and lingering. It's been wonderful, Evelyn, she said, her voice laced with a subtle undercurrent of reproach. Though I have to say, you could have been more hospitable. We're all a bit disappointed with how you've acted. I pulled back, stunned. Disappointed with me? Well, yes, she said, her tone becoming sharper. The attitude, the complaints about cleaning, not wanting to spend time with the kids. We're family, Evelyn. Family supports each other. I opened my mouth to argue, to defend myself, to finally explain how I felt. But the words caught in my throat. There was no point. They would never see my side of things. Have a safe trip home? I said instead, my voice flat and emotionless. As they drove away, I didn't wave. I just went back inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, feeling the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. The house was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. Life without family drama was pretty sweet. My work thrived, I got a substantial raise, and I finally had the peace and quiet I craved. But then, 2 months before Christmas, my social media notifications started blowing up. It was Clara posting photos of her kids on skis, their faces flushed with excitement. The caption read, "Getting ready for our annual Christmas ski trip at Aunt Evelyn's. Can't wait." My heart skipped a beat. I felt a cold dread creep into my bones. With trembling hands, I scrolled through the comments. Not only were my immediate family members confirming their attendance, but other relatives were jumping on the bandwagon. Can't wait to join you all this year. Save room for us. Best Christmas tradition ever. My blood ran cold. They were planning another invasion. They were expecting me to open my home, my wallet, and my sanity to them once again. I felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to flee, to disappear, to escape the suffocating expectations of my family. With shaking hands, I called my mother. "Mom, we need to talk about Christmas," I said as soon as she answered. "Oh, Evelyn, I was just about to call you," she chirped, her voice brimming with excitement. "I have such exciting news. Everyone had such a wonderful time at your place last year that I mentioned it at your cousin Jen's wedding. Now the whole family wants to come. Not just us, but Uncle Steve and Aunt Laura, their kids, Grandma Betty, your cousins from your father's side, about 20 people in total. Isn't that wonderful?" Before I could respond, before I could scream, before I could even form a coherent sentence, she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, rage building inside me like a pressure cooker. I felt trapped, suffocated, utterly powerless. Without thinking, I opened my social media account and typed a short, blunt message. Public service announcement: I am not hosting any family members at my house this Christmas. I repeat, no one is invited to my house for the holidays. Make other plans. I posted it, turned off my phone, and went for a long, angry hike in the woods, trying to clear my head and regain some semblance of control. But when I returned and checked my notifications, I was shocked. Instead of angry responses, instead of the outraged phone calls I was expecting, my family members had commented with laughing emojis and dismissive messages. Good one, Evelyn. Classic Evelyn humor. See you in December. They thought I was joking. They didn't take me seriously. They still saw me as the pushover, the doormat, the eternally accommodating Evelyn who would always cave to their demands. That's when I made my decision. If they wouldn't listen to my words, they'd have to learn from my actions. I went to the grocery store and stocked up on enough food and wine to last me through the holidays. I was determined to enjoy Christmas, even if it meant spending it alone. Then I called a security company and had cameras installed around my property, covering every entrance and every angle. I wanted to document everything. I wanted to be prepared. Finally, I notified my neighbors of the situation, explaining that my family might show up uninvited and that I would not be letting them in. I asked them to call the police if they caused any trouble. And then I waited. Christmas was a week away. The snow was falling steadily, blanketing the landscape in a pristine layer of white. The air was crisp and cold, and the silence was almost deafening. I was ready. Hey, Ida, for digging in my heels? What's coming is going to be a disaster. I can feel it. Sure enough, exactly 1 week before Christmas, a caravan of cars snaked its way up my driveway. Through the grainy feed of my security cameras, I watched as 20 people, including my parents, siblings, their spouses, their kids, and a smattering of extended family members I barely recognized, piled out, laden with luggage, presents wrapped in gaudy paper, and enough ski equipment to outfit a small army. They looked like a conquering force, ready to lay siege to my home, my peace, and my sanity. They rang the doorbell. I didn't answer. They knocked, louder this time, the sound echoing through the silent house like a hammer blow. I stayed silent, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. I was finally standing up for myself. I was finally drawing a line in the sand. After what felt like an eternity, my father called my phone. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the ignore button. But I knew I couldn't avoid the confrontation forever. I took a deep breath and answered the call. Evelyn, we're all here! Open up! Richard boomed, his voice laced with a mixture of annoyance and expectation. No, I said, my voice calm and steady, despite the tremor in my hands. I told you repeatedly that I wasn't hosting Christmas this year. You chose not to listen. Before he could respond, I hung up and muted my phone. I couldn't handle the screaming, the guilt-tripping, the endless barrage of demands. Through the cameras, I watched as my family huddled together in the cold, their faces etched with confusion and disbelief. Diane was gesturing wildly, her arms flailing in the air like she was conducting a symphony of outrage. I could almost hear her voice, shrill and accusatory, even through the muffled audio of the security system. Clara was trying to console her crying kids, who were shivering in the snow, their faces streaked with tears. Ben was pounding on my door, his knuckles white, his face contorted with fury. The doorbell rang again, a relentless, insistent chime that threatened to shatter my nerves. For 20 minutes, they hammered on the door, rang the bell, and shouted my name, their voices growing increasingly frantic and desperate. Then, I saw something that made me grab my phone immediately. The kids, bored and frustrated, were making snowballs and throwing them at my windows. One of the snowballs hit the living room window with a loud thwack, leaving a wet, icy smear on the glass. I called Clara, my voice trembling with anger. Tell your kids to stop throwing things at my house right now. They're just playing, Evelyn. Lighten up, she snapped, her voice dripping with sarcasm. If you'd just let us in. I have security cameras recording everything, I interrupted, my voice rising. If they break a window, I'll report the damage to the police. After I hung up, the adults quickly stopped the kids from throwing more snowballs, but the shouting got louder, the atmosphere more charged. My neighbors, alerted by the commotion, started to emerge from their houses, their faces etched with curiosity and concern. Through the cameras, I could see my elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, shuffling across his driveway, his brow furrowed in disapproval. He approached my family and began speaking to them in a firm, measured tone. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Mr. Peterson. "Evelyn, your family says you've locked them out. Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Yes, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice steady. "I repeatedly told them not to come, but they showed up anyway. I'm not letting them in." There was a long pause, a silence broken only by the faint sound of wind whistling through the trees. "I see," he said slowly, his voice thoughtful. "Well, they're causing quite a disturbance. If they don't quiet down or leave soon, I'm afraid I'll have to call the police." "I understand," I said, my heart sinking. I didn't want to cause trouble for my neighbors, but I couldn't back down now. "Thank you for letting me know," I added, my voice filled with gratitude. When I hung up, I turned up the volume on my security system, eager to hear what was being said outside. I could hear Mr. Peterson relaying our conversation to my family, his voice clear and authoritative. "This is private property," he was explaining. "If Evelyn doesn't want to let you in, that's her right. And you're disturbing the neighborhood. I suggest you all find somewhere else to go before the police get involved." The looks of disbelief on my family's faces were almost comical. They'd never imagined their carefully laid plan could fail so completely. They'd always assumed I'd cave, that I'd welcome them with open arms, no matter how inconvenient or disrespectful their behavior. After a heated discussion among themselves, punctuated by angry gestures and muttered curses, they finally started packing back into their cars, their faces etched with defeat and resentment. I watched them drive away, one by one, the taillights of their cars disappearing into the swirling snow. I was alone. I had won, but the victory felt hollow, tinged with a deep sense of sadness and guilt. Had I gone too far? Had I crossed a line I could never uncross? The fallout was swift and dramatic. The next day, Clara posted a long, tearful video on social media, lamenting how I had abandoned my family at Christmas and left innocent children out in the cold. She accused me of being selfish, heartless, and completely devoid of empathy. My social media was flooded with angry comments from relatives, former school friends, and even complete strangers who had somehow stumbled upon Clara's video. They called me every name imaginable: a monster, a Grinch, a disgrace to the family. I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't try to defend myself, to explain my actions, to justify my decision. I knew it would be pointless. They'd never bothered to listen to me before, so why would they start now? Instead, I did something completely unexpected. I invited a few close friends over for Christmas dinner. We cooked together, laughed together, exchanged modest gifts, played board games, and didn't once mention my family drama. It was the most peaceful, enjoyable Christmas I'd had in years. In the months that followed, my phone remained silent. No calls from Diane on my birthday, no texts from my siblings about their kids' achievements, no invitations to family gatherings. I was officially the black sheep, the cruel daughter who had turned her back on family tradition, the pariah. And honestly, it was exactly what I wanted. Maybe someday they'd realize how they'd taken advantage of me, how they'd treated me like a bottomless well of resources and a personal concierge service. Maybe they'd understand that true family respects boundaries, that it involves give and take, not just endless demands and expectations. Maybe they'd acknowledge that what they'd been doing was selfish and unfair. But even if that day never came, I was okay with it. I had finally stood up for myself. I had finally reclaimed my life. And that was worth more than any family approval, any hollow tradition, any forced sense of obligation. My house was mine again. My time was mine again. My life was mine again. But I still wonder, Aita, was there another way? Did I ruin everything? The silence was deafening. For months, the void where my family used to be echoed through my life. It was a strange mix of liberating and unsettling. I felt like I was finally breathing fresh air after being trapped in a cramped, airless room. But I also felt a persistent, gnawing loneliness, a sense of disconnection that even my closest friends couldn't quite fill. I threw myself into my work. The project I'd almost lost because of the Christmas debacle turned out to be a massive success. My boss, Jack, praised my resilience and dedication, and I even got a bonus. I bought myself a fancy new ergonomic chair for my office and a top-of-the-line espresso machine, the kind that grinds the beans fresh and makes lattes that rival any coffee shop. I justified these purchases as a reward for surviving the holidays and a celebration of my newfound freedom. I started hiking regularly, exploring the trails around my house, immersing myself in the beauty of the Adirondacks. I took up photography, capturing the stunning landscapes and the vibrant wildlife. I even joined a local photography club, forcing myself to be more social, to connect with people who shared my interests. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece, creating a world that was centered around my needs and desires. I learned to say no without feeling guilty, to prioritize my well-being, and to set healthy boundaries. But even as I thrived, a nagging question lingered in the back of my mind. Had I burned too many bridges? Had I permanently damaged my relationships with my family? Was I destined to spend the rest of my life alone, haunted by the ghost of Christmases past? One crisp spring morning, about 6 months after the infamous holiday showdown, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, unassuming box, addressed to me in familiar handwriting. My heart skipped a beat. It was from my grandmother, Betty, my father's mother. I hadn't heard from her since the Christmas incident, and I had assumed she was just as angry with me as the rest of my family. I carefully opened the box, my hands trembling slightly. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a small antique silver locket. I recognized it immediately. It was my grandmother's locket, the one she always wore, the one I had admired since I was a little girl. It was a family heirloom, passed down through generations, and it was incredibly precious to her. Attached to the locket was a handwritten note, written in my grandmother's shaky, elegant script. "Evelyn, my dear," the note read, "I know things have been difficult between you and your family lately. I don't pretend to understand everything that happened, but I wanted you to know that I love you, and I'm proud of you. You've always been a strong, independent woman, and I admire your courage to stand up for yourself. This locket belonged to my mother, and her mother before her. I want you to have it now. Wear it always, and remember that you are loved." Tears welled up in my eyes as I read the note. My grandmother's words were like a balm to my wounded soul. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, reconciliation was possible. I called my grandmother immediately, my voice choked with emotion. "Grandma, thank you so much for the locket," I said, my voice trembling. "It's beautiful, and thank you for the note. It means more to me than you know." "You're welcome, dear," she said, her voice warm and comforting. "I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking of you, and that I support you." We talked for a long time, about everything and nothing. She asked me about my work, my hobbies, my friends. She didn't mention the Christmas incident, and I didn't bring it up either. It was as if the whole thing had never happened. As we were about to hang up, she said, "Evelyn, your father misses you. He's not very good at expressing his feelings, but I know he's been worried about you." My heart fluttered. "I miss him too, Grandma," I said softly. "Why don't you give him a call?" she suggested. "He'd love to hear from you." I hesitated. "I don't know, Grandma. I'm not sure he's ready to talk to me." "Just try," she said gently. "You might be surprised." After we hung up, I stared at my phone for a long time, my mind racing. Should I call my father? Was it too soon? Would he just yell at me, accuse me of ruining the family? But my grandmother's words kept echoing in my head. "He misses you." Finally, I took a deep breath and dialed his number. He answered on the third ring. "Hello?" he said, his voice gruff and hesitant. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. "It's Evelyn." There was a long pause, a silence that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. "Evelyn," he finally said, his voice filled with surprise. "How are you?" "I'm okay, Dad," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to call and say hello." We talked for a few minutes, about the weather, about his golf game, about my work. It was awkward and stilted, but it was a start. As we were about to hang up, he said, "Evelyn, I've been thinking a lot about what happened at Christmas. And I want to apologize. We were wrong. We shouldn't have pressured you to host. We shouldn't have taken advantage of your generosity. We were selfish." Tears streamed down my face as I listened to his words. It was the first time anyone in my family had actually acknowledged their wrongdoing, had actually apologized for their behavior. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "That means a lot to me." "We miss you, Evelyn," he said softly. "We want you to be a part of our lives again." "I miss you too, Dad," I said. "I want to be a part of your lives again, too." We agreed to get together for lunch the following week, just the two of us. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. Over the next few months, I slowly began to rebuild my relationships with my family. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of awkwardness, of tension, of unspoken resentments. But we were all trying. And that was what mattered. I had lunch with my father, coffee with my mother, and even a tentative phone call with Clara. Ben remained distant, but I hoped that, in time, he would come around too. The following Christmas, my family didn't come to my house. We spent the holiday at my parents' house, a smaller, more intimate gathering than the previous years. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. And it felt like a new beginning. I still have the security cameras installed around my property. I'm not sure I'll ever take them down. They serve as a reminder of what I went through, of the boundaries I had to establish, and of the importance of standing up for myself. But now, when I look at the cameras, I don't see a fortress, a symbol of my isolation. I see a reminder of my strength, my resilience, and my ability to create a life that is both fulfilling and authentic. And I see the possibility of a future where family and boundaries can coexist, where love and respect can triumph over expectations and obligations. So Reddit, Aita? Maybe I could have handled things differently. Maybe I could have been more diplomatic, more understanding. But I don't regret my decision. I did what I had to do to protect myself, to reclaim my life, and to create a future that was true to my values. And in the end, that's all that really matters. It's been 3 years since the Christmas that almost broke me. 3 years since I stood my ground, locked my doors, and declared war on my family's expectations. A lot has changed. The initial fallout was intense, a nuclear winter of strained silences and passive-aggressive social media posts. But slowly, painstakingly, we started to thaw. My grandmother's locket became a symbol of that thaw, a tangible representation of love and forgiveness. I wear it every day. My relationship with my parents is different. We're not as close as we once were, but there's a newfound respect. A recognition that I'm not just an extension of their desires. We meet for lunch every few months, and we even manage to have civil conversations without anyone raising their voice. They've stopped trying to orchestrate my life, and I've learned to appreciate their intentions, even when their execution is flawed. Claire and I are cautiously building a friendship. It's slow-going, filled with awkward silences and carefully chosen words. But she's started asking for my advice on things not just about technology, but about life. She even admitted that she admired my courage in standing up to the family. That was a big moment. Ben is still the most challenging. He's polite, but distant. He's never apologized for his behavior, and I doubt he ever will. But he's started sending me pictures of Liam and Chloe, my niece and nephew. Small gestures, but they mean something. I think deep down he understands. And the kids? They're growing up fast. Liam is now a teenager, obsessed with video games and girls, much to his parents' dismay. Chloe is a budding artist, filling notebooks with intricate drawings. Olivia, my youngest niece, is still a whirlwind of energy and mischief, but she's also incredibly sweet and affectionate. They call me occasionally just to chat. It's nice. Christmas has become a much more manageable affair. We rotate hosting duties among the siblings, and everyone pitches in with the cooking and cleaning. It's not always perfect. There are still moments of family drama, but it's a far cry from the chaotic free-for-all it used to be. I still live in my house in the Adirondacks. I've expanded my office, adding a second monitor and a standing desk. I've also created a small guest room, just in case anyone wants to visit. With advance notice, of course. The security cameras are still there. They're a reminder of the past, but also a source of comfort. They represent my boundaries, my strength, my independence. I've learned a lot in the past 3 years. I've learned that family is complicated, that love is messy, and that forgiveness is a process, not an event. I've learned that it's okay to say no, to prioritize my own needs, and to create a life that is authentic to who I am.